Matthew 12 is where we're going to be continuing on today. Page 792 if you have a pew Bible. Make it easy for you to find it. And how's everyone? Ready for some hot weather? We talked about thankfulness and some different things this morning, and one of the questions was, what are the things that a lot of times we maybe overlook when we try to think about what we're thankful for? And it was funny in our group a little bit. We talked about how when it's raining, we start complaining a little bit about the rain. That gets too hot, and we start complaining about hot weather, and we should just be thankful we're alive. Because there's people who aren't, people who are suffering, people who are going through difficult times in life. And sometimes our focus gets taken away from the fact that, we're just alive and we're able to be in a place like this building that we call church. So, quickly, refreshing from last week, the last part of chapter 11 of Matthew, we really saw and heard about what the heart of Jesus was. His core representation of who he was. There was a sternness to those who had a lack of faith and unbelief, but to those who accepted his message, those who put their faith and trust in him, we really see the true heartfelt character of Jesus. 11:28 through 30, I think just really exemplifies that, where he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And if you think about that character of Jesus as it really came out in last week's verses, those of us who would say that we're Christians, that we're Christ followers, that we proclaim Christ in our lives, we see how he comes alongside of us. We see how his character is there to lift us up, to encourage us, to hold us, to link up with us, like that idea of the yoke, and we can learn from him and we come along with him. And we're going to see a little bit of a continuation of that in today's verses, but we're really going to, again, continue to see what Christ's heart and his character is going to look like. The reason he came to earth. Today's text, we're going to see him call out the nonsense of the spiritual leaders. How he wanted the light and the load that was put on the people by the Pharisees, to bring hope and a gospel message, to bring the good news, to bring freedom from sin, and to make known the message of salvation, and to serve the people. I titled the message today, "It's All About Jesus." And I would ask you just keep that in your mind as we go through today's verses, that it's all about Jesus. Before we actually look at our text, let's pause for a prayer. Father in heaven, we want to thank you so much for bringing us here today. We want to thank you that as we have walked in these doors and we could even feel some air conditioning that's keeping us a little bit cool, Lord, I just pray that you would focus our minds and our attentions now to this text, to your word. And Lord, I just pray that as I speak words, that these words would be words that you want spoken and not my words. And I trust in you for that, Father, and I just pray that each of us here today, sitting and listening, would be able to leave here encouraged and strengthened, motivated, and maybe even admonished to be more Christ-like in our walks with you. So we give this time to you, Father, and we ask and pray all these things in your name. Amen. Chapter 12 of Matthew. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." He answered, "Haven't you heard, or haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Going on from that place, he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, and just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place. A large crowd followed him, and he healed all who were ill. He warned them not to tell others about him. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. "Here is my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love, in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through to victory. In his name, the nations will put their hope." We will stop there. So in today's text, we have three separate yet somewhat related stories, and we'll look at each of those as we go through the text and unpack it. We will see that there's a lot more animosity building from the Pharisees towards Jesus. We will continue to see the character and the heart of Jesus, and ultimately, we will gain more insight into the big picture of why Jesus had to come to this earth. The Son of Man, as is referred to in our text today, is used over 80 times in the gospel message. And if we just stop for a second to think about that term, Son of Man, what does that really mean? Jesus used that to describe himself many times in the Gospels. Does anybody have an idea what Son of Man means? I just throw that question out. Any idea? Just yell it out. Nobody? Okay. If you think about it, as Jesus referred to himself, he was fully man, but yet he was fully deity. He was fully God. So as he used that term to describe himself, he was making it known that he was part of humanity, just like you and me, but he was also God. So when he uses that term, we get a good idea that he was one of us, but so much more greater than one of us, he was perfect. He was God in person as a human being. Verse 1, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. Immediately, right off the bat, we see some controversy brewing. What was it about the Sabbath that as they were walking through a grain field, they reached down and picked some of those heads of grain, maybe put them in their hand like this and got rid of the chaff and just took a little bite of grain? What was wrong with that? Seems pretty innocent, but the Pharisees didn't quite think so. We know that on the Sabbath it was considered a day of rest. We know that it probably was a day of worship. It was often a time when families would probably gather on those afternoons. Sometimes they had some feasts. One important piece to remember about that was whatever that feast may have entailed probably would have had to have been prepared the day before, because the Sabbath, you were not supposed to do any work. It immediately brings to my mind when the Israelites were in the desert and the manna came down and God said, on the sixth day, you know what, collect extra because the seventh day is the day of rest. I don't want you working on that day. So there is some precedent why the Pharisees actually would have maybe made a good point of, boy, the disciples are working on the Sabbath. It says, when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. Very interesting as I studied this, I came up with, in a commentary, that there were 39 areas that the Pharisees said work would have entailed on the Sabbath. Harvesting grain would have been one of 39 things that you are not supposed to do on the Sabbath, because it was the day of rest. And it's interesting as we would think back through Old Testament times of what God said. When he created creation and made the earth, he created man and all those different days. And when it says he got to the seventh day, he rested. And it was a day of rest. God didn't say you shouldn't work, but there were some laws that restricted a little bit of what was to happen on the Sabbath. But we can see that the Pharisees and their rabbinic laws, they took things to extremes. And I love how Jesus is there to call out the foolishness of some of the things that they had required the people to do. Verse 3, he answered, haven't you read? And as I read that, it's almost like Jesus is mocking them a little bit. Of course, they're the religious leaders. They would have read. They should have known. Surely you have read. Haven't you read what David did when his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you heard? Again, that phrase, haven't you heard? Surely you've read. You're the religious leaders. You should know this. Haven't you read that the law, that the priests on the Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? And I love these two examples because the first one was, I don't know if you know the story, but David and his men were fleeing from Saul, and they were on the run, and they hadn't had anything to eat, and they came to the temple. Actually, it wasn't the temple at the time, it was the tabernacle. And the priest at the time was Ahimelech. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And it was, from what I understand, general practice that on the Sabbath that bread was made, and that was to be used as, they called it the showbread, which was for the priest to eat. And David said, we're famished. We need some food. And all they had was that showbread. And he even went into the tabernacle where he shouldn't have been and grabbed that bread. And the priest gave it to him and said, yes, there's a principle here. You're not supposed to do this, but the big picture is you're in need. You're hungry. Probably maybe even similar to how the disciples were hungry, or they wouldn't have got the grain. The next example, he talked about the priests who performed duties on the Sabbath. That would have been considered work. How are the priests supposed to do their duties if they're not working? But God made a way for them. There was a law that said they were not guilty by doing the things that God prescribed for them to do on the Sabbath. The Pharisees had forgot about that. The authority of the temple laws shielded the priests from the guilt of the work that they would have done. And just as we will see in the text here shortly, I believe Jesus' authority shielded his disciples from the guilt that they should have felt from picking the grain. Verse 6, I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. Of course, that was Jesus. And it was all about Jesus. If you had known these words, if you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Again, it was all about Jesus. And if we take a step back, and again, look at the intentions of the Pharisees. In their minds, they were probably would have thought they were doing the right thing because they would have remembered. Exodus 31:14, observe the Sabbath because it is holy to you. Anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death. Those who do any work on that day must be cut off from their people. Exodus 20, verses 9 through 11, 6 days you shall labor and do not work, and do all your work. But on the seventh day, the day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. You see, the Pharisees, as they remember these things, they are trying to get the people to do what that is saying. But they added so many additional restrictions to their laws that they just overburdened the people. And Jesus is calling them out for their foolishness and their nonsense. The parallel passage to what we read here in Matthew, in Mark chapter 2, it says that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And if you look at it that way, it gives, I think, a little bit better meaning to understanding how to treat the Sabbath. And again, as I mentioned earlier, as God made creation, and as he said he rested on that seventh day, man had already been created, but then he had to have that day of rest for man. And as he instructed mankind to rest on that seventh day, it was to honor him, to worship him. It was to set aside to recharge yourself and be ready for another work ahead of you, to get ready to work. All the additional things that the Pharisees would have required for people on that Sabbath day just loaded them down and would not have been what God's original intent was for resting on that Sabbath day. See, the Pharisees had it backwards. As man was made for the Sabbath, not man for the Sabbath, the Pharisees would have said the Sabbath was made for man. Had things upside down and backwards. Jesus made claims there's one greater than the temple. He said, I'm the Son of Man, the Lord of the Sabbath, the one who actually commands what happens on the Sabbath, the one who owns the Sabbath, the one who is in charge of the Sabbath. Jesus is saying, that's me. And he goes on to say, if you would have only understood what these words would have meant, to desire mercy instead of sacrifice. Again, the Pharisees would have had backwards thinking. They were thinking more sacrifice than desiring mercy. Hosea 6:6 comes to mind, and it was quoted earlier in Matthew 9. We read this a few weeks ago. But it says in Hosea 6:6, for I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. And when you stop and we think how Christ's character over the last couple weeks is really coming out, we really, really start to see the heart of who Jesus really is. He's desiring mercy, not sacrifice. He wants devotion to him rather than all these ritualistic things that people tried to do to come to know God. Those are the exact same ways Christ is calling us today to come to him. We don't have to do a whole list of things. He's providing us mercy. Just come to me. Yoke is easy. My burden is light. Come unto me, those of you who are heavy burdened. He's there for us. His heart is calling towards us. Micah 6, verses 6 through 8. What shall I come before the Lord? With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. What does God expect from us? It's the exact same things that he expected from the Jewish people at the time that he walked this earth, the same time that he proclaimed that he was Lord of the Sabbath, at the same time that he proclaimed he was the Son of Man. He wants people to approach him humbly, to love mercy, and to come alongside him. Back to our text. This is kind of the second point, event that's happening in our text today. Verse 9 says, going on from that place, he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? It always is. I find it comical because the Pharisees are always trying to trap Jesus. Always, and it never works out for their benefit. And at some point, we know that they just kind of stopped doing that because they knew they could not get anywhere by doing that. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So as I studied, there were some things where you could actually heal on the Sabbath and it was okay to do. They said that if it was a life or death matter, you could go ahead and heal on the Sabbath. But in this case, this man's shriveled hand was not a life or death matter. So they think, oh, we got Jesus now. What's he going to do here? And again, I love Jesus' response because he could have answered yes, just plain and simply. But he doesn't do that. He asks the question kind of like a commentary back to them. Hey, which of you, if you had a sheep and it fell into a hole on the Sabbath, would you not reach down and pick it up? Get it out of that? How do you think the Pharisees would have felt at this point? Yeah, I'm sure I probably would do that. That would have been considered work. And I love Jesus. He just goes right to the core. Verse 12, how much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. I love how Jesus changes the original question because everyone knew what the answer to that original question was. Jesus changed it so the people can understand, do I want to do good or do I want to do what's evil? Anybody in their right mind would know and understand healing somebody's hand, pulling that sheep out of the ditch, which has more value, the person or the sheep. If they said the sheep was okay, healing the guy's hand is not okay, boy, would have looked pretty bad. Jesus refocuses their attention, calls out the nonsense of what was going on there. Jesus was greater than the temple. He was the Lord of the Sabbath. He desired mercy, not sacrifice. Again, the authority of Jesus is being revealed with his words and with his actions. I also find it interesting because as he talked to this gentleman with the withered hand, it doesn't even say he put his hand on him. It doesn't say anything about he created some salve and rubbed it on his hand to make him well. All he did was stretch out your hand. Ask the gentleman, stretch out your hand. Just the very words of Jesus proving his authority, the things that he, just a couple verses previously, said about himself, validates who he said he was. It's all about Jesus. Verse 13 said to the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out. It was completely restored, just as sound. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Put yourself in the shoes of the Pharisees. They probably would have been feeling shame, embarrassed. They were one-upped by Jesus yet again. And why did they look to kill him? It wasn't because he healed the man on the Sabbath. It wasn't because he said, my disciples are fine to eat grain on the Sabbath. But think about the proclamations that Jesus has just made about himself. Everything that he said about himself was the things that the Pharisees put him on trial for. When he was on trial, if you think forward, they didn't say, as they brought charges against him, well, he healed this guy on the Sabbath. The charges weren't, well, he let his disciples eat grain and pick it on the Sabbath. The charges against Jesus were that he's claiming to be the Son of God. The very things Jesus has proclaimed here in the text. One more reason that it was just all about Jesus. Let's go back to our text. Verse 15, aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place. A large crowd followed him, and he healed all who were ill. I don't know what a large crowd would have looked like, and I don't know how many ill people may have been in that crowd, but it says he healed all that were there. And he warned them not to tell others about him. And this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. It's Isaiah 42, 1 through 4. It's almost word for word. Here is my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love and whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through to victory. In his name, the nations will put their hope. If you remember back to chapter 11, the first part of chapter 11, John the Baptist sent his disciples to Jesus, and he said, are you really the one who we've been looking for? And do you remember what Jesus told them? Go tell John, I'm healing people. The sick are getting better. People are coming back to life. I'm ministering to the poor. Proving to John the Baptist who Jesus was, his authority, who he said he was. We see Jesus doing the exact same things, continuing on, proving who he was, the Messiah, the chosen one, called from God to be the Son of Man, come into the earth like you and me, yet live in a perfect life as God incarnate in the flesh. He was a servant. He was the chosen one. These verses are talking about who is this person who's going to come, the servant, Jesus. We see it. He was the chosen one. We see it. It says, whom I love, I delight in, who I put my spirit on and proclaim justice. Think back when Jesus was baptized. What did the Spirit come down and say? This is my Son whom I love. Again, putting all these pieces together, we start to see this glimpse of who Jesus was, who he is, who he continues to be. He's going to bring justice. I love how it says not quarreling. We didn't see Jesus arguing in the streets, trying to create a big uproar. Again, leading back to his character of being gentle and humble. The smoldering reed, the broken reed, not breaking it even worse, being gentle with it. The smoldering wick, not putting it out. Again, advocating for the weak, advocating for the poor, advocating for those who maybe had a hard time doing those things for themselves. Jesus was that person, looked out for them. And I love in this quote from Isaiah how it talks about the hope of the nations, because that's the great hope for us today. We're not part of Israel. I don't know anybody here who has a Jewish background and that's their heritage. But when it talks about all the nations, that's opened that door for me, for you, for all the nations to come to Christ, to come to know him, to come to understand him, to come to be yoked alongside of him and learning from him. It really reveals the character of Christ, the Son of Man, the Lord of the Sabbath, someone greater than the temple, someone who's gentle and kind, who's an advocate. And again, it's all about Jesus. So through this text today, what do we stop and we think, and what do we take away from it? How is this going to impact my life? We read this, we understand it, we can see Christ's character, we can see the actions, we see what he did, what he performed, healed people, the claims he made about himself. What do we take away today thinking about this? Hopefully you have thoughts racing through your mind. Hopefully the Spirit has been prompting you. Hopefully the Spirit has been speaking to you. And I'm struggling with something. Jesus' character is there to pick me up. Boy, I'm having a hard time with X, Y, Z. Lord, I need to put more trust in you. Lord, I'm having a hard time forgiving my neighbor. Maybe I need to show more mercy rather than sacrifice. I don't know what that is. But I believe God is speaking to us today. And it's my prayer that as we leave here today, we can truly say and know and understand and believe and have a better picture of what Christ has done for each of us, what he continues to do for each of us. And as we think to the future, what he will do with us. I pray that the Lord would bless the word this morning.